Welcome, wanderer. Come inside quickly before the night's chill finds you. It is always warm and safe here in our library. Do you hear it? Only the soft crackle of the fire and the steady rhythm of rain against the high, stained glass windows. You are safe now. You can breathe. Settle comfortably into this old leather chair while I find just the right story for us tonight. Let us walk deep into the aisles where it smells of ancient parchment and dried herbs. Ah, yes, this shelf is right here. Do you see this tome? It is very old. Its cover is the color of faded sandstone, and the edges of the pages are thick with desert dust. As I open it, there is a faint scent of jasmine and warm, damp earth. Let me blow away the dust and take you to a place that perhaps only ever existed in dreams, to the hanging gardens of Babylon. The journey has been so very long, felt in the aching soles of worn sandals and the dryness of a throat that cannot be quenched. Before you even see the great city, you feel it. You feel it in the heat. It is not merely a temperature here, it is a physical weight. A heavy, shimmering blanket pressing down from a sun that seems larger, fiercer than any sun you have known before. It sits upon your shoulders, turning the air thick and hard to breathe, as if you are swimming through warm honey rather than walking through open air. And then there is the dust. It is an ancient, relentless thing. It rises in great lazy plumes from the thousands of feet and hooves that beat the hard-packed earth ahead of you. It is a fine powder, the colour of dried ochre and pale clay, and it suspends in the still air like a golden fog. It clings to your eyelashes, making them heavy. It settles into the fine lines of your skin, turning the sweat on your forearms into streaks of gritty mud. You can taste it on your tongue, mineral salt, and the faint, inescapable flavour of dried earth. It is the taste of Mesopotamia itself, gritty between your teeth. Through this shimmering, heat-hazed veil, the city begins to materialize. At first, it seems like a mirage, a trick of the heat-drunk mind desperate for shade. Massive shapes, impossibly high, rising from the utter flatness of the plain like man-made mountains. They do not seem built so much as carved from the bedrock of the world. As you draw closer, the hazy shapes sharpen into walls, towering, formidable walls that seem to stretch endlessly to the left and to the right, swallowing the horizon. And they are not just drab mud brick, as the villages you passed days ago were. No, these glimmers. Even through the dust you see flashes of vibrant, startling blue, glazed tiles that catch the ferocious sun and throw it back with a cool, defiant defiance. They are like pieces of the deepest ocean or the midnight sky, brought down and mortared into place here in the burning desert. The silence of the open plains is gone now, shattered so gradually you almost didn't notice it happening. It has been replaced by a roar, It is not a sudden noise, but a persistent low-frequency hum that vibrates deep in your chest, like the purring of some colossal, sleeping beast. It is the sound of humanity gathered in unthinkable numbers. As you merge with the great river of travellers flowing toward the gates, the hum resolves into individual sounds, a chaotic symphony of arrival. You hear the sharp, guttural cries of donkey drivers, their beasts laden with towering bundles of reeds and clinking pottery. You hear the heavy rhythmic trundling of wooden cartwheels grinding against stone. 1,000 voices speak at once, a dizzying babble of tongues you do not recognize, the rapid, clipped tones of Akkadian traders, the softer lilt of Aramaic, strange dialects from the far mountains of the east and the great sea of the west. Entering the shadow of the great gate, the air changes again. It is momentarily cooler, shaded by the sheer thickness of the walls, but it is also thicker, heavier with scent. You are swallowed by the smells of Babylon. The dry dust is overpowered now by the pungent, earthy odour of thousands of animals. Camels, oxen, goats, mingled with the astonishingly sweet aroma of roasting dates and honey from a nearby vendor. Underneath it all is the smell of the river, the Euphrates. You can smell its dampness, a scent of wet reeds, cool mud, and ancient water that has travelled endlessly to be here. It is a smell of life in the midst of the arid wastes. Nothing is still. Even here, at the threshold, the city churns with relentless, frantic energy. It does not seem to care that the sun is beginning its long descent. The bustle only intensifies. Couriers with sweating brows dart through gaps in the crowd like fish through reeds. Tall, solemn figures in expensive dyed linens glide past, flanked by guards with bronze-tipped spears that glint menacingly. Beggars with outstretched, dust-caked hands sit in the small slivers of shade, their murmurs lost in the din. You are tiny here. That is the overwhelming sensation of arrival, insignificance. You are a single grain of sand added to a magnificent, terrifying dune that shifts and moves with a life of its own. This is a place that does not sleep, a place where the heat, the noise, and the sheer crushing weight of civilization never truly fade, even when the stars finally break through the dusty sky. To stand before the walls of Babylon is to understand, perhaps for the first time, the true meaning of scale. From a distance they were merely a feature of the horizon, but here, standing in their immense shadow, they are the entire world. You crane your neck back further and further until the muscles ache, and still they seem to ascend, disappearing into the dusty haze of the upper atmosphere. They are so tall that they seem to disconnect from the earth entirely, vast cliffs of man-made geology that block out the sun. You reach out a hand, hesitant, almost afraid to touch something so colossal. Your fingertips graze the rough, sun-baked surface of the mud bricks. They are warm, radiating the stored heat of a million desert noons. You realize, with a sudden, dizzying vertigo, that this is not one solid mass. It is millions upon millions of individual bricks. Each one was shaped by a human hand. Each one was carried, placed and mortared by someone who lived, breathed, sweated, and died long before you were born. The sheer weight of that labor, solidified into this mountain of clay, is crushing. You are not just standing next to a wall, you are standing next to the fossilized effort of an entire civilization. And then you turn toward the gate. Nothing could have prepared you for the Ishtar Gate. In this land of relentless beige and blinding white sun, it is a shock to the senses, a physical blow of vibrant, impossible color. It is a deep, shimmering ocean of lapis lazuli blue. It is not merely painted, it is glazed, a thin layer of glass fused over the brickwork that catches the fierce light and reflects it with a cool, watery brilliance. It looks wet, as if freshly risen from the primordial depths. As you walk closer, the great blue facade towers over you, 50 feet high, perhaps more. It seems to vibrate with a silent, potent energy. You feel astonishingly small, not just small in size, like a child standing among giants, but small in time. You are a fleeting, momentary speck of dust drifting past something built to last until the end of days. Emerging from this deep blue sea of glazed brick are the guardians. They are reliefs, raised from the surface, marching in structured, hypnotic rows. There are golden lions, their manes detailed with terrifying precision, mouths open in eternal silent roars. There are fierce bulls, the aurochs rippling with muscular power. And there are the mushusu, the strangely beautiful dragons with the bodies of serpents, the forelegs of lions, and the hind legs of eagles. They do not look like mere decorations. In the shimmering heat waves radiating from the ground, they seem to writhe. Their golden scales catch the light as you move, making them appear to march alongside you, an eternal procession of divine beasts watching your every step. You feel their ancient, uncaring gaze. They have watched kings return in triumph, laden with the spoils of conquered nations. They have watched prophets and prisoners dragged in chains, weeping into the dust. And now they watch you. Passing under the great archway of the gate, the sound of the world changes. The immense thickness of the walls, so wide that rumoured chariot races could be held atop them, muffles the chaotic roar of the outside world. For a moment, there is a hushed, sacred stillness in the tunnel of blue and gold. Your sandals slap against the paved processional way, the sound echoing sharply, magnified by the enclosed space. It is cool here, in the throat of the gate. The air smells faintly different, less of dust and animals, and more of cold stone, ancient dampness, and the metallic tang of the glazed surfaces. You run your hand along the smooth, cool blue tiles as you walk, feeling the ridges of a golden lion's tail under your palm. To walk through this gate is an act of submission. You cannot help but lower your head, cowed by the sheer majesty of it. It was designed this way. It was built to make you feel exactly as you do now, insignificant, transient, a ghostly visitor passing through the eternal, unshakable heart of the world. You are entering the property of the gods, and you have never felt so mortal. The day does not end quickly in Babylon. It bleeds away, a slow, bruising transformation of the sky. You find yourself drawn, as all living things here eventually are, to the river. The Euphrates is not merely water flowing through land. It is a miracle. In this endless expanse of parched beige and dusty ochre, it is a violently vivid ribbon of life. As the sun begins to touch the jagged western horizon, a silhouette of distant ziggurats and palm groves, the water changes. It loses its muddy daytime brown and becomes a mirror of molten bronze. It is immense, wider than you could have imagined. It moves with a deceptively lazy silken power, a massive silent muscle flexing through the desert. You can hear it now, over the dying hum of the city, a deep, ceaseless gurgle, the sound of water lapping hungrily against the reed-choked banks. It is a cool, wet sound that feels soothing against ears battered by the dry winds of the plains. The air here, by the banks, is fundamentally different. It is heavy, humid, and rich. It smells intensely of life, of deep, squelching mud that has never known dryness, of rotting reeds and sweet blooming water lilies that dot the calmer inlets like fallen stars. It smells of fish, a silvery raw scent that speaks of abundance in a starving land. As the great red disk of the sun sinks lower, it sets the sky on fire. Clouds you hadn't noticed before suddenly ignite in brilliant streaks of violet, blood orange, and bruised plum. The river reflects this celestial inferno perfectly. For a few breathless moments, it looks as though the Euphrates is flowing not with water, but with liquid fire. Boats, small curved skiffs made of woven reeds and coated in black bitumen, glide silently across this burning surface. They are sharply silhouetted against the glare, black cutouts of fishermen casting their circular nets one last time. You hear the faint splash as the nets hit the water, the only disturbance in the grand, slow procession of the current. On the far bank, the date palms stand like an army of sentinels, their feathery fronds black and sharp against the dying light. They seem to drink the sunset, their towering forms leaning ever so slightly toward the water that sustains them. You can see the faint, glittering networks of irrigation canals sliced into the land, carrying the river's blood deep into the thirsty fields, turning death into gardens. You sit on the cooling mud brick embankment, feeling the stored heat of the day slowly seep out of the stone beneath you. The first stars begin to prick through the darkening dome above, impossibly bright in the desert clear air. But even as night claims the sky, the river glows, holding the last memory of the light. It is a humbling sight. You realize that without this silent brown god flowing before you, none of this would exist. The towering walls, the golden lions, the shouting crowds, all of it would be swallowed by the hungry sands in a week. The Euphrates is the only reason there is a heartbeat here at all. It is a fragile, powerful artery of cool, sweet life, pulsing defiantly through the heart of a burning world. And as you watch it flow into the gathering dark, you feel a profound, quiet gratitude for its endless, uncaring generosity. To enter the royal palace is to leave the gritty, sun-baked reality of Babylon behind and step into a world spun from dreams and gold. The transition is jarring. One moment you're in the dusty, sweltering streets. The next, you have passed through massive cedar doors, their wood polished until it gleams like dark honey, smelling richly of distant mountain forests, and into a realm of impossible, suffocating luxury. The air here is startlingly cool. It does not feel natural. It is a manufactured chill, born of immensely thick walls that hold the desert heat at bay, and aided by servants who silently, endlessly fan large blocks of ice brought from faraway peaks, wrapped in straw to slow their weeping melt. The air is perfumed, heavy and cloying. It smells of frankincense, of sweet oils burning in alabaster lamps, and of thousands of exotic flowers that should not be blooming here, yet do, forced into vibrancy by constant attention. Your sandals make no sound now. The hard, dusty pavement has been replaced by carpets so deep and plush that your feet sink into them as if into soft, dry moss. They are masterworks of crimson and indigo wool, woven with patterns so intricate they make your eyes water to trace them. Every surface that can be decorated is. Walls are not merely walls, they are canvases of glazed brick depicting lush, impossible gardens, where lions and lambs rest together in eternal frozen harmony. Doorways are framed in beaten gold that catches the flickering lamplight, casting warm, shivering reflections that dance on the polished limestone floors. And yet, for all this splendor, there is a heaviness here that has nothing to do with the opulent tapestries. It is a silence that feels brittle, tense. The servants, dozens of them gliding like ghosts in their fine white linen kilts, move with eyes perpetually downcast. They do not speak. They do not look at one another. They are mere extensions of the palace's furniture, terrified of making a sound that might shatter the fragile atmosphere. You see courtiers gathered in small, huddled knots in the cavernous halls. They are draped in silks dyed with Tyrian purple, worth more than their weight in silver, and dripping with jewelry. Heavy gold torques rest cold against their throats. Lapis lazuli beads click softly as they shift nervously, but their faces are not happy. They are tight, wary masks. Their eyes dart constantly toward the inner chambers, filled with a restless, gnawing anxiety. They hold jeweled goblets of sweet wine from the Zagros highlands, but they do not seem to taste it. They pick at platters piled high with pomegranates, roasted fowl and honeyed cakes, but there is no joy in the feasting. It is a frantic, hollow kind of consumption. You realize slowly that this palace is not a home. It is a spectacularly gilded cage. The luxury is not meant for comfort. It is meant for display, a desperate, glittering armor against the fear of what lies outside, and perhaps what lies within. The gold is cold to the touch. The sweet perfumes cannot quite mask the underlying scent of stale air and anxiety. In the deepest heart of the palace, where the silence is most profound, you feel it most strongly. It is a vacuum, a yearning emptiness that all the gold in Babylon cannot fill. You are surrounded by everything a human being could possibly desire, yet you have never felt a profounder sense of melancholy. It hangs in the cool, scented air like a softly weeping ghost, a whispered truth that echoes off the marble floors. Here, in the center of the world, amidst unimaginable treasure, happiness is the only thing that cannot be bought. In the stifling, perfumed stillness of her chambers, the queen does not see the golden walls or the intricately woven tapestries that depict the triumphs of her husband's empire. Her eyes are open, staring past the polished cedar pillars, past the shimmering heat haze of the city she now rules, to a place that exists only in her aching memory. Babylon is a world of horizontals. It is flat, endlessly, relentlessly flat. The land stretches out in every direction like a taut beige sheet, broken only by the rigid man-made verticals of ziggurats and walls. The sky here is too big. It presses down on you, an immense unbroken dome of pitiless blue that offers no shelter, no hiding place. The heat is a dry, dusty thing that coats the throat and cracks the lips. But Media, Media. In her mind she is there now. She closes her eyes and almost feels the phantom caress of a cool mountain breeze on her cheek. A breeze that does not carry the grit of the desert, but the sharp, clean scent of pine resin and damp, shadowed earth. Media is a world of verticals, of soaring, jagged peaks that scrape the belly of the clouds. It is a land where the horizon is not a flat line, but a fierce, chaotic sawtooth of granite and green. She remembers the sound of it, not the drone of a million city voices, but the roar of snowmelt waterfalls crashing down rocky gorges, the wind singing through high mountain passes, the lonely, echoing cry of an eagle circling above a misty valley. She remembers the color. Here, everything is the color of baked clay, brown, ochre, dusty yellow. But her home was a riot of verdant life. Deep, mossy greens in the shadowed forests where the sun rarely touched the ground. Bright, shocking emerald in the high alpine meadows after the spring thaw, carpeted with wild flowers, tiny fierce splashes of blue and violet and crimson that shivered in the chill air. She remembers the feeling of cold, real cold, not the manufactured cool of palace ice blocks, but the biting, invigorating chill of a mountain morning, where your breath puffs out in white clouds before you, and you must wrap yourself in thick furs just to watch the sunrise. Here her feet tread on soft, dead wool carpets. There she remembers the feel of damp, springy moss under her bare soles, the sharp bite of cold granite pebbles in a mountain stream. A tear, hot and sudden, tracks through the coal on her cheek. It is a tiny, wet rebellion against the dry dust of Babylon. This city is a marvel, a jewel of civilization, she knows this. But to her, it is a magnificent, sun-baked prison. It is too flat, too hot, too brown. Her soul is starving for the shadowed valleys, for the scent of rain on cold stone, for the wild, untamed green of the mountains that she will likely never see again. She is the queen of the world, draped in gold, yet she would trade it all for one single breath of thin, sharp mountain air. The king sees her. He sees past the carefully painted mask of her royal face, past the jewels that hang heavy as shackles around her neck. He sees the dullness in eyes that once held the sparkle of mountain streams. He sees the way her hand sometimes drifts, unconsciously, to touch the wilting petals of a potted desert flower, her fingers tracing its thirst with a heartbreaking gentleness. He loves her with a ferocity that frightens him. He has conquered nations for less than the shadow that now lives in her gaze. He has leveled cities and raised others from the dust, commanded armies that drank rivers dry and held the fate of millions in his palm. But he cannot command her sadness to leave. He cannot conquer her longing. One evening, as the fierce sun finally bleeds out into the western sands, leaving the sky bruised purple and angry red, he finds her on the highest terrace of the palace. She is looking east, always east, toward the invisible distant peaks of her home. The hot wind tugs at her linen robes, carrying the ever-present taste of dust. He stands beside her, and the silence between them is heavy, filled with words that do not need to be spoken. He feels the immense, crushing weight of his own impotence. He is the King of Kings, yet he cannot give her the one thing she truly desires, home. And then a thought. It begins as a spark of madness, a reckless, impossible defiance against nature itself. If he cannot take her back to the mountains, he will bring the mountains to her. He turns to her and takes her hands. They are cold despite the heat of the evening. "I will build it for you," he whispers. The words are soft, but they carry the unshakable weight of a royal decree. They are more than a promise. They are a reshaping of reality. He looks out over the flat, baking expanse of his city, the endless roofs of mud brick, the dusty streets, the shimmering haze of heat. It is a landscape that defies green. It is a place where water evaporates before it hits the ground, where the sun is a merciless tyrant that burns all delicate things to ash. "I will build you a mountain here, in the heart of Babylon," he continues, his voice gaining strength, vibrating with a sudden, fierce creative energy. "It will not be like these ziggurats of dead stone. It will be alive. It will breathe." He can see it now in his mind's eye, rising above the dust. Terraces piled upon terraces, soaring upward, defying gravity and reason. Not brown, but green, a cascading, overflowing riot of green. He will tear the very forests from the distant hills and root them here. He will make rivers flow uphill to water them. He will break the laws of nature to see her smile again. It is an insane promise. His architects will pale when they hear it. His engineers will say it cannot be done, that the desert will kill anything they try to plant, that the sheer weight of the soil will crush the foundations. He does not care. He squeezes her hands, his eyes burning with a terrifying determination. "You will have your garden, my love. You will have your green valleys and your shadowed paths. I will make the desert bloom for you, even if I have to bleed the Euphrates dry to do it." It is a promise born of love and of a supreme, arrogant confidence that there is nothing, not even the will of the gods or the cruelty of the sun, that can stand against him when he chooses to act. He will build the impossible simply because she desires it. They gathered in the deepest, coolest chamber of the royal palace, a room where the thick mud brick walls swallowed the merciless heat of the day. They were the greatest minds of the empire, master builders whose hands were stained with the dust of 100 temples, hydraulic engineers who could read the pulse of the Euphrates like a lover's heartbeat, astronomers who mapped the orderly dance of the stars. But today there was no order in their eyes, only fear and a dawning, terrifying awe. The king's command hung in the still air like the smoke from the oil lamps. "Build me a mountain that lives." They huddled over vast sheets of papyrus and smoothed clay tablets, their voices hushed, urgent whispers that echoed softly off the limestone floor. The challenge was not merely architectural, it was a war against fundamental truths. "Stone will not hold it," murmured an old architect, his beard long and white as river foam. He traced a trembling finger over a hastily drawn elevation. "To pile earth that high, the sheer weight of wet soil deep enough for great trees to root, it will crush any normal foundation. The arches must be immense. They must be stronger than anything we have ever built. And the water, hissed another, a man with sun-darkened skin who smelled faintly of river mud. Trees from the mountains cannot drink the dusty dregs of the plain. They need constant flowing moisture. We must lift the river itself into the sky. It was an insane proposition. Water wants to flow down, to find the lowest point, to make it climb hundreds of feet into the baking air, to keep a man-made mountain eternally damp in the heart of a desert. It was defying the gods themselves. They began to draw, not just walls, but complex interlocking skeletons of baked brick and bitumen. They devised vast vaulted chambers beneath the terraces, cavernous spaces designed to bear the crushing load of the artificial hills above. They argued over the composition of the mortar, needing something that would remain imperious to the constant seeping damp that would rot normal mud brick in weeks. Someone suggested lead, sheets of pure lead laid between the soil and the stone to seal the moisture in and protect the structure below. It was wildly expensive, a king's ransom in metal just to be buried in the dirt. They wrote it down without hesitation. Expense was not a constraint here. Failure was the only forbidden thing. For the water, they dreamed up a machine that had never existed, a great, endless chain of buckets, driven by the tireless circling of oxen far below, scooping water from deep wells and passing it hand to hand, up, 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 to the highest pinnacle, from where it would cascade down like a captive mountain stream. Night turned into day, and day into night again, but the lamps in the chamber never went out. The air grew thick with the smell of sweat, anxious thought, and scratching styluses. They were terrified of the king's wrath should they fail, yes, but beneath the fear, a spark was igniting in them too. It was the intoxicating thrill of the impossible. They were being asked to play God, to take the flat, dead clay of Babylon and sculpt it into a living paradise. As the plans grew more complex, more daring, their whispers became faster, sharper. They were no longer just obeying a tyrant. They were dreaming of a wonder that would outlive them all, a structure that would make future generations gasp and say, "Surely giants built this." The greatest enemy was gravity. It is the oldest law of the earth. Water seeks the low places. It wants to rest in the deep mud, to flow lazily toward the distant sea. It does not want to climb. To make a mountain bloom in the desert, you must conquer this ancient law. You must force the river to ascend, step by agonizing step, toward the blazing sun it naturally flees. The engineers stood by the banks of the Euphrates, watching the brown water slide past, indifferent to their dilemma. They needed not just buckets of water, but rivers of it, a ceaseless, thrumming artery of liquid life that would never run dry, day or night, for all eternity. If the water stopped even for a few days, the fierce Babylonian sun would turn their magnificent green dream into withered brown tinder. They drew their answer from the very depths of their ingenuity. They would build a machine such as the world had never seen, a colossal, unending screw. Imagine a vast spiraling tube, carved from seasoned cedar that had been soaked in bitumen until it was black and hard as iron. Inside, a tightly fitted helix, like the shell of a great sea snail winding upwards. It would sit at an angle, its hungry mouth dipped deep into immense cisterns fed by the river, its throat reaching toward the first great terrace. But who would turn such a titan? No man had the strength. They dug great pits, deep into the cool earth, where the air was thick and still. Here, hidden from the eyes of the court, would be the beating heart of the garden. Massive wooden gears, tall as houses, with teeth carved from solid oak, meshing together with a slow, grinding groan that would vibrate through the very foundations of the palace. Attached to these gears, long beams yoked to teams of oxen, powerful, patient beasts that would walk in endless, dizzying circles in the gloom. Their plodding hooves would turn the gears would turn the great screws, and slowly, miraculously, the water would begin to climb. It would be a symphony of friction and fluid, the deep rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum of the turning screws, the splash and gurgle of water being dragged against its will, higher and higher, the creak of wood under immense strain, the wet slap of the water as it was finally released onto the highest terrace, emerging into the sunlight dazed and glittering. From there, gravity would become their friend again. The water would be guided into intricate channels lined with glazed tile to prevent it from seeping away. It would cascade over engineered falls, sounding for all the world like natural mountain rapids. It would pool in calm, shaded basins where delicate lilies could unfurl. It would seep slowly, deeply, into the specially prepared soil, reaching the thirsty roots of trees that had no business growing this far from the misty hills. It was a violent, magnificent conquest. Every drifting leaf, every damp patch of moss, every shimmering droplet of dew on a strange, exotic flower would be a victory won by grinding gears and sweating beasts in the dark below. They were not just watering a garden, they were pumping the lifeblood of the Euphrates into the sky, defying nature with every agonizing rotation. Babylon is a city of mud. It is born from the river's silt, baked by the sun into hard, brittle bricks. It is a practical material, abundant and cheap, but it is the stuff of the plains, dusty, crumbly, and utterly devoid of majesty. To build a mountain, the king needed the bones of the earth. He needed a stone. And so the call went out, radiating from the palace like ripples in a violently disturbed pond. It reached the distant, jagged peaks of the Zagros Mountains to the east, where the air is thin and sharp. There, armies of quarrymen, their skin leathery from cold winds, hammered iron wedges into supreme cliffs of granite and limestone. You can almost hear the ringing clang, clang, clang of metal on primordial rock echoing through those lonely high passes. Huge blocks, grey and cold and unbelievably heavy, were pried loose from the mountainside. They were brutal, uncaring things, these stones. They crushed men who were too slow, snapped thick ropes like dry reeds. They had to be dragged on great wooden sledges, rolling slowly, painfully, over logs that groaned and splintered under the insane weight. Mile after agonizing mile, they were brought down from the heights to the waiting rivers, to be floated downstream on massive rafts that sat terrifyingly low in the water. But stone was only the skeleton. The garden needed flesh, and for that it needed wood that would not rot in the constant, manufactured damp. Far to the west, in the misty, brooding forests of Lebanon, the axes began to fall. These were not ordinary trees. These were the cedars of God, immense ancient giants that had stood since before the first cities rose from the mud. Their scent is powerful, a rich, intoxicating perfume of resin and sharp evergreen that clings to the skin for days. To fell one was an act of violence that shook the forest floor. The crash of 1,000-year-old cedar is a sound like thunder, a death cry that sends birds scattering into the terrified sky. They were stripped of their branches, leaving massive, straight trunks that bled sticky, fragrant amber sap. They travelled hundreds of miles, dragged overland by straining teams of oxen, then lashed together into vast, floating islands of timber that drifted slowly down the great rivers toward Babylon. The arrival of these materials in the city was a spectacle. The dusty streets, used to nothing heavier than a donkey cart loaded with grain, groaned under the weight of the stone sledges. The air, usually smelling of dried dung and hot dust, was suddenly awash with the alien, refreshing scent of fresh-cut cedar. People stopped and stared, their mouths agape. They touched the rough, cold surface of the granite blocks with awed fingertips. Many had never seen a rock larger than their fist. They inhaled the strange, spicy perfume of the distant forests, a smell that spoke of unimaginable green worlds far beyond their flat beige horizon. It was a staggering display of power. The king was not just building a structure, he was casually rearranging the geography of the world, dragging the mountains and the forests across vast, hostile distances to pile them up in his backyard, all for the sake of a promise. The garden did not rise in a day, or a month, or a year. It rose in an endless, hypnotic rhythm, a slow accumulation of uncountable tiny moments of labor. If you closed your eyes near the construction site, The sound was not chaotic. It was a steady, droning pulse, a heartbeat of creation that resonated deep in the chest. Slap, scrape, thud. It was the sound of 10,000 hands working in unison. The wet slap of thick, muddy mortar being thrown onto a waiting layer of fired bricks, the gritty scrape of a trowel smoothing it out, spreading the grey, binding ooze to the perfect, uniform thickness, the solid, heavy thud of the next brick being pressed into place, locked forever into the growing mountain. Over and over, slap, scrape, thud. It was a mantra. The men who worked the walls fell into a trance-like state. Their movements became fluid, automatic. They did not need to think. Their muscles remembered the rhythm. Bend, lift, turn, place. The sun beat down on their bronze backs, turning their skin dark and shiny with sweat. But they did not stop. They were part of a great, slow machine made of flesh and clay. Beneath this steady percussion, there were other deeper sounds. The low, mournful groan of the great wooden cranes, lifting impossibly heavy stone blocks into the sky. The ropes, thick as a man's arm, creaked under the strain, a dry, rasping complaint that signaled immense tension. Sometimes there was the rhythmic chanting of the gangs hauling the sledges. A leader would call out a sharp, guttural syllable, and 100 men would pull as one, their sandals slipping in the dust, their breath escaping in a collective hiss of effort. The sledge would lurch forward a few agonizing inches, grinding against the earth with a deep, vibrating rumble that you felt through the soles of your feet more than you heard. But mostly it was the bricks, millions upon millions of them. It was a soothing sound in its own way. It was the sound of order being imposed on chaos. Slowly, inexorably, the chaotic piles of raw materials were vanishing, consumed by the rising, orderly terraces. The endless repetition was a promise, brick by brick, hour by hour. The impossible was becoming real. The city slept, the kings feasted, the stars wheeled overhead, but the rhythm never truly stopped. It just slowed, a quieter, deeper breathing in the cool of the night before the frantic pulse of the day began again. As the great terraces began to take shape, rising like stepped altars toward the blinding sun, a new scent began to dominate the air of Babylon. It was not the comforting, earthy smell of sun-baked mud brick that the city knew so well. It was something darker, thicker, more primordial. It was the smell of bitumen. It came from steaming cauldrons, huge black iron pots sitting over roaring fire pits that cracked and spat. The bitumen bubbled inside like primordial tar, a thick, glossy black liquid that smelled intensely of ancient earth, of deep, hidden places where the sun never reached. It was a sharp, chemical tang that caught in the back of the throat, heavy and oily, Men wrapped in thick leather aprons that were stained stiff and black dipped long ladles into this bubbling darkness. They moved with a grim, focused care. A splash of this hot liquid on bare skin meant agonizing burns. They poured it over the layers of reeds and baked brick that formed the floors of the great terraces. It spread slowly, a creeping, shiny black tide that filled every tiny crack, every microscopic pore in the clay. It hissed faintly as it touched the cooler brick, releasing fresh clouds of that pungent, inescapable fumes. This was the vital, unseen armor of the garden. Normal mud brick would dissolve like sugar if kept constantly wet. The roots of the great trees they intended to plant would seek out any weakness, prying apart the stones with slow, relentless strength. The bitumen was the shield. It promised that the water would stay where it belonged, in the soil, feeding the roots, not seeping down to rot the foundations of the palace below. Mingled with the sharp bite of hot tar was the cooler, damper scent of wet clay. Not the dry dust of the streets, but thick grey river clay, hauled up in sodden baskets from the Euphrates banks. It was slapped onto the walls in great wet handfuls, smoothed over the bitumen to create a final, impermeable seal. It smelled fresh, mineral, and clean, a stark contrast to the oily heaviness of the tar. Together, these scents formed the olfactory landscape of the construction. It was a primal smell, earth and oil, fire and water, binding together to create a vessel that could hold a living mountain. It hung over the city like a heavy, invisible cloak, a constant reminder that something unnatural, something profound, was being born in their midst. The first level did not so much rise as it did emerge painfully from the flat earth. For months it was nothing but a gaping wound in the ground, a chaotic pit of shouting men and straining beasts. But slowly the chaos began to organize itself. Massive foundation stones, those grey giants from the distant Zagros, were wrestled into deep trenches. They disappeared into the mud, never to be seen again, silent, unsung martyrs bearing the unimaginable weight of what was to come. Then the brickwork began. At first it was just a low ridge, barely ankle-high, tracing the immense square perimeter of the lowest terrace. It looked impossibly small, a fragile line of red clay against the vastness of the city. But day by day, row by row, it grew. It reached knee-height, then waist-height. Soon it was a solid, formidable wall that you had to crane your neck to see over. It was incredibly thick, dozens of feet of solid masonry designed not just to stand, but to hold back the crushing lateral pressure of thousands of tons of wet soil. Inside this great growing box, the space was filled, not just with random dirt, but with carefully layered purpose. First, rubble and broken stone for drainage, so the roots would not drown in stagnant water. Then, coarser gravel, And finally, the precious dark topsoil brought in endless caravans of baskets from the most fertile floodplains of the river. It was a slow, almost imperceptible growth, like watching a glacier move. You could not see it changing if you stared at it, but if you looked away for a week and came back, it was suddenly different. The horizon had shifted. A new, unnaturally straight line had been drawn against the sky. The first terrace finally reached its appointed height, 50 feet above the dusty streets. It stood there, a vast, flat expanse of dark, rich earth, held aloft by sheer human will. It was stark and barren still, just a monumental platform of dirt waiting for life. But even in its bareness, it was awe-inspiring. It cast a long, cool shadow over the neighbouring houses, a shadow that had never existed before. The flat world of Babylon had, for the very first time, been given a contour. Deep within the belly of the man-made mountain, far beneath the sun-drenched terraces where flowers would soon bloom, there lies a hidden world of shadows and relentless motion. This is the mechanical heart of the garden, a place few will ever see, but without which the paradise above would wither and die in days. The air here is thick, humid, and cool, a stark contrast to the dry oven of the world outside. It smells intensely of wet wood, ancient stone, and the musky sweat of oxen. It is a cavernous space, vaulted with massive arches of baked brick that seem to sweat in the damp darkness. The only light comes from sputtering oil lamps fixed to the walls, casting long, flickering shadows that dance and warp, making the colossal machinery seem alive. Dominating the chamber is the great water engine. It is a towering structure of dark, sodden cedar, slick with algae and constant moisture. It is Archimedes' screw, though that name will not be known for centuries. It is huge, a wooden leviathan that spirals upward into the gloom, disappearing through a circular aperture in the vaulted ceiling. The sound here is deafening in its monotony. It is a constant rhythmic grinding, creak, groan, splash, creak, groan, splash. The creak groan is the sound of wood under immense torture. Thick beams turning slowly, rubbing against their bearings with a deep, resonant complaint that vibrates through the wet stone floor and into the very bones of anyone standing there. The splash is the water. It is scooped from deep, dark cisterns below by the hungry mouth of the screw, lifted against gravity, trapped in the spiraling chambers, and carried endlessly upward. You can hear it sloshing inside the wooden tube, a prisoner being dragged to the sky. Driving this titanic machine are the oxen. They are ghost-like figures in the dim light, their massive white flanks heaving, their heads lowered in bovine resignation. They walk in an endless, perfectly circular rut worn deep into the stone floor. They are blindfolded, so they do not know they are going nowhere. They just walk, plodding forward step after heavy step, yoked to great horizontal beams that turn the central gear. The gear itself is a masterpiece of terrifying simplicity. Teeth carved from solid tree trunks meshed together with a slow, crushing inevitability. To get a limb caught between them would be to lose it instantly, ground to pulp without the machine even slowing. This is a place of pure, brute function. There is no gold here, no glazed tile, no intricate carving. There is only wet wood, cold stone, sweating beasts, and the endless, relentless battle against gravity. It is the dark, churning gut that digests the river and turns it into the blood of the garden. Stand close to the great wooden screw, and you can lose yourself in its motion. It is mesmerizing, a physical manifestation of eternity. It does not spin quickly. It turns with a slow, agonizing deliberation, a heavy, irresistible rotation that speaks of immense power held under tight control. Round and round and round, you watch a single point on the blackened wood, a knot perhaps, or an iron band binding the cedar planks together. You watch it appear from the shadows on the right, climb slowly over the glittering wet curve of the top, and disappear again into the shadows on the left. It is a cycle that never ends, a monotonous, hypnotic revolution. Inside the open channel of the screw, the water is defying every instinct it possesses. It is trapped in pockets formed by the spiral blades. As the whole massive structure turns, these pockets travel upward. You can see the water sloshing and swirling angrily within its wooden cells, trying desperately to flow back down to escape. But the turning blade is always there, pushing it, lifting it, inexorably carrying it higher. It looks less like flowing water and more like a segmented, glittering snake made of liquid, endlessly slithering upwards toward the distant square of light in the ceiling. It catches the dim lamplight in fleeting flashes, silver sparks dancing in the gloom. The sound is a continuous wet rush. It is the sound of a river being forced to flow backwards. There is a steady, rhythmic gush, gush, gush as each pocket of water is lifted past your ears. It is a soothing sound, hypnotic in its regularity, like the breathing of a sleeping giant. If you stare at it too long, you begin to feel dizzy. The room seems to spin in the opposite direction. The motion worms its way into your mind until all you can see, even when you close your eyes, is that endless spiraling ascent. It is a triumph of geometry over nature, a simple, brilliant, terrifyingly effective way to make the impossible happen, one slow rotation at a time. Stepping from the outer world into the technical corridors of the garden is like plunging into deep water. The heat of Babylon does not just fade here, it is violently rejected. Outside, the sun is a physical weight, a hammer that beats down on every living thing until it gasps for shade. The air is thin, dry, and shimmers with aggressive heat. But here, Behind 30 feet of solid mud brick and damp earth, the world is fundamentally different. The air is heavy, yes, but it is heavy with cool moisture, not oppressive heat. It chills the sweat on your skin instantly, raising goose flesh on your arms. You breathe in, and your lungs are filled not with hot dust, but with a startlingly cold, clean dampness. It smells of wet limestone, of deep, undisturbed earth, and faintly of mould, a quiet, secret smell that speaks of places the sun has never touched. Touch the walls. They are cold, not cool, but genuinely cold, leaching the heat from your fingertips in seconds. They are slick with condensation, weeping tiny, slow tears of water that trickle down to vanish into dark drainage channels in the floor. It is a shock to the system, this sudden, intense cold in the heart of a desert city. It feels almost unnatural, a stolen piece of a deep mountain cave transplanted into the blazing plains. You realize that the garden is not just a marvel of height, it is a marvel of insulation. It has created its own microclimate, a secret, shivering heart that beats steadily while the rest of the world burns. They came from the edges of the known world, an unwilling migration of green. Messengers had ridden out from Babylon months before, carrying tablets stamped with the king's seal. They rode until the flat plains gave way to rolling hills, until the dry scrub turned to lush forests, until the air grew thin and cold. They went to the mist-shrouded valleys of Media, to the cool, rainy coasts of the Great Sea in the west, to the humid, sprawling deltas of the south. And then the great uprooting began. It was a delicate, brutal operation. Ancient pomegranate trees, their gnarled trunks twisted like wrung-out rags, were dug carefully from the rocky soil of their mountain homes. Their roots, deep and tangled, were wrapped instantly in wet burlap and packed with their native earth, desperate to trick them into thinking they had never left. Rare vines that bloomed only in the deepest shade of northern forests were coiled gently into damp, moss-lined crates, shielded from a sun they would not understand. Exotic flowers, tulips of burning red from the high steppes, delicate white lilies from distant marshlands, were dug up as bulbs, sleeping silently in sacks of cool sawdust, unaware of the chaotic journey ahead. They travelled in long, slow caravans that moved only by night. To travel by day would be death. The fierce desert sun would wither them in hours. So they moved under the cool, indifferent gaze of the moon. Camels, usually laden with spices or silk, now bore swaying forests on their humps. It was a strange sight, a ghost forest moving through the dunes. You could smell it before you saw it, a sudden, confusing waft of damp pine needles, of rich, peaty soil, of sweet alien blossoms drifting across the dry desert sands. Every day when the cruel sun rose, the caravan would stop. Tents were pitched not for the men, But for the trees, they were doused with precious water, guarded more zealously than chests of gold. Men died to keep them alive. A spilled water skin could mean the death of a rare sapling, and that was a failure the king would not forgive. They arrived at the gates of Babylon battered, travel-weary, their leaves drooping with exhaustion. They were refugees from 100 different climates, dragged across hostile wastes to a strange, hot land, all to fulfill one man's impossible promise. The planting was an act of desperate tenderness. The gardeners of Babylon were used to date palms and hardy desert scrub, plants that could take a beating and still thrive. But these new arrivals were delicate, frightened things. They were mountain royalty used to gentle mists and cool, rich loam, now thrust into an alien oven. The gardeners worked with a breathless, almost reverent care, their hands, usually rough and calloused from desert work, moved with the gentleness of midwives. They did not just dig holes, they prepared beds. They mixed the heavy, rich soil brought up from the river banks with sand to improve drainage, and with dark, crumbled leaf mould, specially imported from the distant forests to make the earth feel familiar to the bewildered roots. When a great tree was lowered into its new home, winched down slowly by silent, sweating teams of men, the gardeners were there in the pit with it. They didn't just shovel dirt back in, they packed it softly around the delicate root hairs with their fingertips, ensuring there were no air pockets that could dry them out. They murmured to the trees as they worked, soft, coaxing words in old dialects, as if trying to soothe a frightened animal. "Drink now, little one. Rest your feet. You are safe here." They watered them not with buckets, which might wash away the soil, but with gentle trickles from spouted clay jars, mimicking the slow, steady seepage of a mountain spring. They built delicate screens of woven reeds around the most sensitive plants, shading them from the brutal midday sun until they could find their strength. It was a frantic race against shock. Every drooping leaf was a crisis. Every yellowing frond was a failure. They worked through the night by the soft light of oil lamps, tending to their charges like anxious parents, willing them to take hold, to drink, to live in this strange, towering new world they had been forced into. The moment had come. The great mountain of brick and soil stood complete, a stark, brown, terraced pyramid against the blue sky. It was planted, but it was dry. It was waiting. Deep below, in the cool dark, the order was given. The whips cracked, not in cruelty, but in signal. The oxen leaned into their yokes. The great wooden gears groaned, a sound like the waking of a leviathan. The screws began to turn, creak, groan, splash, creak, groan, splash. Up above on the highest terrace the king and queen stood, watching. The air was still, hot and silent save for the distant hum of the city. And then a new sound, faint at first like wind rustling through dry leaves. It grew louder, a steady, liquid rushing. Water burst from the engineered spouts at the very pinnacle of the structure. It didn't just flow, it leapt, glittering in the fierce sunlight like liquid diamonds. It hit the first splash plates designed to break its fall and spread it out, and suddenly, miraculously, it began to rain in Babylon. It was not the terrifying, torrential downpour of a desert storm. It was a gentle, persistent curtain of fine mist and splashing droplets. It cascaded from terrace to terrace, a shimmering waterfall controlled by human hands. The dry soil drank it greedily. You could hear the hiss as dusty earth met cool water for the first time. The smell was instantaneous and overwhelming, petrichor, utterly intense. The scent of wet dust of awakened earth rose up in a dizzying cloud. Droplets landed on the drooping leaves of the transplanted mountain trees. You could almost see them shudder with relief. The dust of the journey was washed away in rivulets of mud, revealing the startling, vibrant green beneath. Flowers that had clenched themselves tight against the heat began very slowly to unfurl. The sound changed everything. The harsh, dry silence of the desert was replaced by the music of 1,000 tiny streams, trickling, splashing, dripping, gurgling. It was the sound of a mountain spring, cool and endlessly refreshing, echoing strangely from the mud-brick walls of the burning city. It was the sound of life returning to a dead place. To climb the garden is to walk through the layers of the world. You begin at the bottom, where the air is still heavy with the dust of the city. Here the plants are familiar, sturdy date palms with their rough, scaled trunks, casting sharply defined shadows on the paved paths. The scent is recognizable: hot dust, warm brick, and the faint, sweet tang of falling dates fermenting in the sun. It is Babylon, but greener. As you ascend the first grand staircase, the air begins to change. You leave the city's heavy heat behind, trading it for something cooler, softer. The sounds of the streets, the shouting merchants, the braying donkeys fade into a distant, meaningless hum, replaced by the hypnotic drip, drip splash of water falling from the terrace above. On the middle levels, you are in a strange hybrid land. Here grow the fruit trees brought from the milder valleys, pomegranate trees, heavy with leathery red globes that are beginning to split open, revealing seeds like glittering garnets. Fig trees with their vast hand-shaped leaves, smelling intensely green and milky. The shade here is deeper, dappled and flickering. The paths are damp underfoot, moss beginning to creep between the paving stones. You run your hand along a limestone wall, and it is cool, slick with condensation. Climbing higher still, your breath catches. You are now above the rooftops of the palace. The air is startlingly thin and fresh. You are entering the impossible realm. Here are the great cedars, their massive, dark trunks radiating a spicy, resinous perfume that overwhelms the senses. It is the smell of ancient forests, a smell that has no business being here. Needle-laden branches brush against your face, sharp and cold. The light is dim, filtered through dense canopies of alien green. Ferns, delicate and lacy, unfurl in the perpetual misty twilight created by the artificial waterfalls. Finally, you reach the summit. You are breathless, not just from the climb, but from the sheer dissonance of it. You stand in a high alpine meadow, surrounded by shivering wildflowers, tiny, intense splashes of violet and cold blue. The wind up here is sharp and unimpeded, but it does not carry dust. It carries moisture. You look down, and the dissonance gives you vertigo. Far, far below, spread out like a beige map, is the sweltering, dusty reality of Babylon. But you are standing on a cool, green island floating in the sky, wrapped in the scent of pine and damp earth, 1,000 miles away from the desert that lies just beneath your feet. Ascending the garden is not merely a journey of distance. It is a journey through climates. At the base, the heat still prowls. It waits just beyond the first line of shade, a tangible presence that licks at your heels. The air here is warm and thick, smelling of sun-baked earth and the sweet, heavy scent of jasmine that thrives in the warmth. Your skin remains tacky with sweat, but with every flight of wide limestone stairs, the world cools. It is a gradual, delicious shedding of heat. By the third terrace, the aggressive bite of the sun is gone, broken by the dense interwoven canopy of foreign leaves overhead. The light that reaches you is soft, green, and watery. You begin to feel the moisture on your skin, not sweat, but a fine, cool mist that hangs perpetually in the air. It clings to the tiny hairs on your arms, turning them into a shimmering velvet. You take a deep breath, and it does not scorch your throat. It soothes it. The air is dense with water vapor, rich with oxygen breathed out by 1,000,000 happy leaves. By the time you are near the summit, you might even shiver. It is a shocking sensation in Babylon, a luxury greater than gold. The humidity here is absolute. Every surface is damp. Droplets of water hang like jewels from the tips of fern fronds, trembling with the vibration of the great water screws deep below. The stone benches are cold enough to make you draw your robes tighter. Up here, you are wrapped in a perpetual manufactured cloud. The harsh, desiccating desert is just a memory, banished by the sheer brute force of pumped water and deep shade. You have climbed out of the furnace and into the cool, dripping heart of a mountain gorge. From the highest terrace, Babylon is just a pattern in the dust. You stand at the rail, a cool breeze lifting the hair from your damp forehead, and you look down at the center of the world. It looks terrifyingly small. The great processional way, wide enough for armies to march 10 abreast, is just a thin, pale ribbon slicing through the sprawl of brown roofs. The people are less than ants. They are motes of dust drifting aimlessly through the maze of streets. You cannot hear their individual voices anymore. Their joys, their sorrows, their desperate daily struggles for coin and bread, it all dissolves into a faint, meaningless hum that is easily drowned out by the rustle of cedar branches above you. Even the great ziggurat, Etemenanke, the tower that claims to reach heaven, seems diminished from here. You are eye to eye with its highest reaches, no longer cowed by its massive bulk. Up here, surrounded by the impossible green, you feel a strange, calm detachment. The urgent matters of the empire, the wars on distant borders, the squabbles of courtiers, the rising price of grain, seem trivial, remote. They belong to the hot, dusty world below. You are above it all, literally and spiritually. You float in a separate sphere of cool, misty tranquility. It is a God's eye view, a perspective that makes human endeavour look frantic and fleeting. In this high, quiet garden, only the slow growth of trees and the eternal cycle of falling water seem to matter. You have escaped the earth, if only for a little while, and found a fragile, artificial peace in the sky. The garden at night is never truly silent. It has its own secret language, a hushed conversation between water, wind, and tiny lives. The dominant sound is still the water, but in the dark it seems louder, more intimate. The splash, gush, trickle of the artificial streams echoes more clearly off the cool stone walls. You can hear the individual droplets hitting the fern leaves, a frantic, chaotic tapping like tiny fingers on a drum. Beneath this liquid rhythm is the choir of the insects. They have found this oasis in the desert, drawn by the moisture and the green. Crickets, thousands of them, hidden in the damp moss and thick undergrowth, fiddle their endless chirping song. It is a vibrating curtain of sound, a high-pitched, pulsing thrum that becomes the very texture of the night air. Sometimes a breeze will wander up from the river, cooler now. It moves through the garden like a ghostly hand, stroking the trees. You hear the dry, rattling whisper of palm fronds rubbing against each other on the lower levels. Higher up it is the soft, sibilant hush of pine needles, a sound like the sea washing over a distant pebbled beach. Every now and then a sleepy bird will make a soft, questioning noise from its roost in a cedar tree, a tiny, fluted note that hangs for a moment in the darkness before being swallowed by the insect choir. It is a deeply peaceful soundscape, utterly removed from the harsh, jarring noises of the human city. It is the sound of nature content thriving in its impossible man-made cradle, singing a quiet lullaby to the sleeping desert. The garden is a sanctuary, but it is not unguarded. In the deepest shadows where the moonlight does not reach, there are eyes that watch. They are the night guardians, the silent, invisible custodians of royal peace. You would never know they were there unless you knew exactly where to look. They do not wear the clanking bronze armor of the city watch, nor do they carry heavy spears that might scrape against stone and shatter the stillness. They are dressed in dark, soft wool that drinks the light, making them mere smears of deeper shadow against the cypress trees. Their feet are wrapped in thick felt, making their movements utterly soundless. They do not walk, they drift, gliding from the cover of one archway to the deep gloom of a vine-choked trellis. They are armed with silent weapons, weighted nets that can stifle a cry before it is born, curved daggers made of dull, darkened iron that does not gleam. Their job is to ensure that nothing, no assassin, no thief, not even a stray, noisy animal, disturbs the fragile tranquility of the Queen's Walk. They know every inch of the garden better than they know their own children's faces. They know which flagstone rocks slightly and might make a clicking sound. They know which thicket of oleander is dense enough to hide a man. They communicate not with words, but with tiny, indistinguishable sounds. The click of a tongue that sounds like a gecko, a soft whistle that mimics a sleepy night bird. They are ghosts in the machine of paradise, fiercely loyal shadows who ensure that the only things the king and queen ever encounter in their high green world are peace, perfume, and the cool kiss of the night wind. They are the unseen guarantee that the dream remains perfect, unbroken by the harsh realities of the dangerous world below. It is done. The noise of construction has faded into memory, replaced by the eternal, gentle music of falling water. The Queen walks alone on the highest terrace. It is late afternoon, the time when the desert sun is fiercest. But here, in the dappled shade of tall cedars, it is only a warm, golden light that filters through the needles, painting shifting patterns on her white linen dress. She stops by a small, perfectly clear pool. Ferns, lush and intensely green, curl over the water's edge, their tips just brushing the surface. She reaches out a hand, her fingers trailing through the cool, impossibly fresh water. It is real. She closes her eyes and breathes in, deeply. The air does not smell of dust. It smells of damp earth, of pine resin, of the sweet, heady perfume of mountain roses that have finally, miraculously bloomed. For the first time since she left her homeland, the tight, aching knot in her chest begins to loosen. The fierce, flat horizon that used to mock her is hidden now by a comforting wall of green leaves. The roar of the dry wind is drowned out by the rustle of branches that sound just like the forest of her youth. She is not home. She knows this. The mountains are still 1,000 miles away, but this is a breathtaking echo of home. It is a love letter written in living wood and flowing water, a monument to a devotion so vast it bent the world to its will. A small, genuine smile touches her lips, softening the lines of sorrow that had begun to etch themselves there. She sits on a stone bench, cool beneath her, and leans back against the rough bark of a cedar tree. She closes her eyes, listening to the water, smelling the green, and for this moment, in this impossible place suspended between earth and sky, she is content. The promise has been kept. The garden became their world within the world. It was the only place in the vast, sprawling empire where they could truly be alone. In the throne room they were symbols, gold-draped idols to be worshipped and feared. In the banquet halls they were performers, watched by 1,000 envious, calculating eyes. But here, under the sheltering canopy of the great trees, they could just be a man and a woman. They would come here in the evenings, when the day's duties had finally been stripped away like heavy, uncomfortable armor. They would sit on a secluded bench hidden behind a cascading wall of jasmine vines, where the air was thick with sweet perfume. Here, the King of Kings, the scourge of nations, would rest his head in her lap. He would close eyes that were weary from reading endless tablets of tribute and rebellion, and she would run her cool fingers through his dark, curled beard. He would tell her not of wars and conquests, but of his small, secret fears, the weight of a crown that sometimes felt too heavy to bear, the terrifying loneliness of absolute power, and she would speak to him not as a subject, but as his heart. She would tell him of a strange, bright bird she had seen that morning, or how the new fig trees were finally bearing sweet fruit. She would tease him gently, something no other living soul would dare to do, and the sound of his genuine, unguarded laughter would startle the roosting doves. The great trees stood as silent, loyal witnesses to these fragile moments. The ancient cedars absorbed their whispered secrets into their thick bark. The rustling leaves covered their quiet words from any prying ears that might be lurking on the terraces below. In this high green sanctuary, stripped of pomp and ceremony, their love was allowed to breathe. It was a tender, private thing, growing fiercely in the hidden spaces, nurtured by the same impossible water that kept the garden alive. To be inside the garden is to be swaddled in a waking dream. It is more than just walls and guards that make you feel safe here. It is the crushing, overwhelming reality of the place itself. It is so fiercely alive, so vibrantly green, that it pushes the rest of the world away. The desert, with its stinging sands and harsh truths, feels like a distant nightmare, something that cannot possibly touch you here. The air is thick and soft like a blanket. The sounds are gentle lulls. The light is always filtered, golden and kind, never harsh. You feel held by the garden, cradled in its immense leafy arms. It is a psychological fortress. Up here, surrounded by the impossible, you begin to believe that nothing is truly impossible. If a mountain can be made to float in the sky, if a river can be made to flow backwards, then surely nothing bad can happen. You walk the mossy paths with a sense of utter, childlike invulnerability. The problems of tomorrow, sickness, age, the inevitable fall of empires, they cannot climb these stairs. They are stopped at the gates by the fierce bronze lions and the even fiercer magic of this place. It is an illusion, of course, the most beautiful, seductive illusion ever created. But while you are inside it, breathing its perfumed air, listening to its eternal fountains, you do not care. You surrender to the dream completely, letting it wrap you in its soft green embrace, safe from the burning world outside. Nothing built by human hands is eternal, not even a mountain made of dreams. The end did not come with a sudden, violent cataclysm. It came slowly, quietly, like the irresistible creep of desert sand over a forgotten road. It began when the empire fell, as all empires eventually do. New masters came to Babylon. They did not love the garden with the fierce, desperate passion of its creator. To them, it was just an expensive curiosity, a drain on the treasury. The decline started in the dark heart of the machine. The great wooden gears, once oiled daily and inspected with obsessive care, began to dry out. They cracked, teeth broke off. The rhythmic creak groan of the water screws developed a stutter, a painful grinding hitch. Fewer oxen were sent to the underground chambers. The flow of water, once a mighty unending torrent, slowed to a trickle. On the high terraces the thirst began. The delicate water-loving ferns were the first to die. They turned brown and brittle, crumbling to dust between the fingers of the wind. The great foreign trees, the cedars and the mountain oaks, held out longer. They were proud, stubborn things, but without the deep, constant soaking they needed, their needles began to yellow and fall, carpeting the neglected paths in a thick, dry shroud. The gardeners grew fewer. There was no gold to pay them. Weeds, fierce and hardy desert things that needed no water, began to invade. They pushed up through the cracks in the limestone paving, their wiry roots prying the beautiful stones apart. The bitumen linings of the terraces, untended, began to crack under the baking sun. Water, when it did come, no longer stayed where it was supposed to. It seeped into the mud-brick core of the structure, slowly dissolving the very bones of the mountain. It was a long, agonizing death. For decades, perhaps centuries, it stood as a majestic, rotting ruin. Dying giant, its skeletal branches clawing at the uncaring sky. its once green terraces turning back into the same dusty brown as the plains that surrounded it. The miracle was slowly, inexorably being reclaimed by the desert it had once so arrogantly defied. As the physical reality of the garden crumbled back into the dust, something else began to happen. It began to ascend from the earth into the indestructible realm of memory and story. Travelers who had seen it in its dying days told their children about a mountain that had once been green. Their children told their own children about a towering paradise where trees touched the clouds and it rained forever. With each retelling, the garden grew. It became taller, greener, more magnificent. The bricks ceased to be mud and became solid gold. The water was no longer just pulled from the Euphrates, but was magical, flowing from an inexhaustible celestial spring. It travelled along the Silk Roads, carried in the saddlebags of merchants alongside spices and jade. It crossed the seas on Phoenician galleys, whispered by sailors during long, star-filled nights. It reached the ears of Greek historians who had never set foot in Babylon, but who wrote of it with breathless, vivid certainty, ranking it among the greatest wonders the world had ever seen. It became a shared dream of humanity. It ceased to be a specific place built by a specific king for a specific queen. It became the garden, an archetype of lost paradise, a symbol of the infinite capability of human love and human engineering. The mud bricks dissolved, the cedar rotted, the great bronze screws were melted down for weapons by conquering armies. But the story was tougher than stone. It rooted itself deep in the human imagination, watered by our collective longing for the impossible, and there it bloomed, eternal and unfading, long after the real Babylon was nothing but wind-swept mounds in the desert. And now we too must leave Babylon. The image of the great green mountain fades, dissolving like a mirage in the shimmering heat. The sound of falling water, which has echoed in our ears for so long, grows faint, replaced once again by the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing in the quiet dark. We drift away from the ancient city, floating back across the centuries, carried on the gentle current of time. The golden walls, the roaring lions, the scent of jasmine and dust, they all recede, becoming small and indistinct, just another story folded away in the vast library of human memory. You are safe here, in your own time, in your own space. But perhaps, as you close your eyes tonight, a tiny piece of that ancient magic will remain with you. Perhaps, just before sleep takes you, you will catch a fleeting scent of cedar wood in the air, or hear the ghostly whisper of a waterfall where none should be. If you wish to return tomorrow night for another tale, you know where to find us. Your place will always be ready. Sleep now. Let the dust of history settle. The garden waits for you in your dreams, perfect and eternal, forever green against the desert sky. good night.